Hello and welcome to another video from My Random Hobbies, and today we're going to be talking about becoming a transport manager. So let's get into it. So as you'll know from previous videos, I have changed my career in the last 6 months from being a teacher, deputy head teacher, to a HGV driver. And I've been fortunate, as you'll have seen, to get work with a company who took me on initially as a van driver. Then when I qualified as a class 1 driver, also allowed me to drive with them on a part-time basis. And the rest of the time is filled with helping them with the operations side. So that's being an operations manager for shifts, making sure that the drivers know where they're going, what they're doing, etc., etc. Part of my developing role is that they have asked if I would consider becoming qualified as a transport manager to effectively aid them day to day with the running of their transport business. The reason for this is because, like many small companies, they have an external transport manager at the moment, and that's all good and fine. But I think the ultimate goal is to try and move that sort of more internal, and that's where they perhaps see my role moving in the future. So earlier in the year, they asked me and then presented me with a whole load of information for a course, and the course was being run by Enterprise Transport Training, and they do a number of qualifications, courses, predominantly in this case the transport management side. So yeah, they came to me and asked me if I would consider becoming qualified to be a transport manager, and presented me with this little book from Enterprise Transport Training so that I could learn to be a transport manager. But alongside this little book came a very different sized book. This folder here, nice and thick, with 600 pages in it. 600 pages of information, all about transport management, all about the business of road haulage, getting things from one place to another. That's a lot of information, and as well as that information, there was a link to an online platform where there were some live sessions where you could talk to someone live. They'll go through some information, you could ask questions, and then some practice questions as well, and scenarios and things. So I agreed to take this on and to have a go at it. I mean, after all, it is kind of, up my street in terms of what I'm able to do, or what I feel I'm able to do based on previous experiences. So the process got started, and then unfortunately my father became rather ill and died during this process. So it wasn't the easiest of times, and I would say that concentration on studying wasn't at the forefront of my mind, shall we say. And then sort of 4 days after the funeral, I sat the first set of exams, and that was my choice. That wasn't the company forcing me to do so or anything else, but obviously the exams were there to take a shot, and to become qualified, or to get your qualification, your CPC qualification, there are 2 examinations. The first exam is a multiple choice. There are 60 questions on there, and it could be from any aspect within that 600 pages there. So there's an awful lot of information that you've got to try and absorb and maintain, and then know an awful lot about. And I'll talk about the types of questions in a moment. And then there's the case study one, where it's an open book, so you can look at the book for that one. You can't for the multiple choice. And it gives you scenarios, and you have to then answer a number of questions in written format. So that one I was probably least concerned about, because I've got a fairly logical brain, and I'm relatively intelligent, and therefore I felt going into that fairly confident. And the scenarios, were fine. The information presented, I understood, I could interpret, and I could do various calculations, etc., in order to solve those problems. So when a month and a half later you get your results back, I passed that case study part, well. So I don't need to go into the exact marks, but I was way above the pass mark for the case study point. However, on the multiple choice, and again, remember, there's an awful lot of information that I probably had about 2 weeks to learn in reality, because I'd also picked this up partway through the course. I didn't have the full time to do the studying, plus obviously my father as well. So I missed the multiple choice by 2 marks. So I missed the pass mark by 2 marks. So I was a bit sort of gutted about that, but understandable, considering I hadn't really applied myself to the learning. So what did that mean? It meant that I've got half of it, and I needed to resit the other half. I needed to resit the multiple choice, which I did a couple of weeks ago on the 10th. And again, it'll be another 6 weeks from that date till I get my results. So it's a little bit frustrating, but it's a proper examination set by an examination board, goes off for marking just as you would your GCSEs, A levels, those sorts of things. So the time lag is understandable, though not excusable, I think, in this day and age, to be fair. I think there probably could be a computerized version of this with an instant marking, but there we go. So the questions, as I say, could be on any aspect of transport management. Now, this book, the smaller one, is almost like key information. You see, I've actually says key facts, but there are different headings within the sort of booklets. Business essentials. So as a transport manager, you've got to understand the financing of business, the setting up of business, contracts, commercial conducts, employing staff, health and safety, and all the regulations that come with all of that. So that in itself is a big part. Then you've got to understand the management of the fleet. And obviously a fleet is however many units, tractor units you have, and trailers, and what you've got to do to maintain those, to make them roadworthy, to make them safe, to carry out your day-to-day business. And again, there's a lot of information on there, whether it's how much weight they can carry, how often they have to be tested, what type of tests have to be carried out, tire depth, etc., etc., loading, strapping, specialist loads. I mean, there's quite a few questions, obviously, from time to time about hazardous goods and how much you can carry, what type of signage you have to have on for width and length and all that sort of thing. So there's an extraordinary amount to learn. Then there's compliance, which is a big part of transport management. Again, it's very important to understand your driving hours, how many hours your drivers have had this week, how many they have next week, in a 2-week block, in a and so on. And it's not as straightforward as you might think. And again, there are different rules for double manning. There are different rules depending on the type of transportation you're in. There's some exemptions, and you've got to know it all. Then you've got international operation stuff, and there's a whole load of extra bits and pieces on that, which, if I'm being perfectly honest, is probably an area where I really struggled with, because you've got to try and remember codes and names for different bits of paperwork and formalities when doing all these different types of load. And if you're not into that, if that's not your business, then it's harder, I think, to grasp and understand. Whereas some of the stuff that I do day to day in my job and my role, I understand already. So that those aspects of this course were easier for me. Then you've got other things like insurance and taxation and all those things. So there's an awful lot to learn. And the questions can be really, I don't know if they're trying to trip you up. They're definitely trying to make it hard. You don't want everyone passing, I understand that. But they can be phrased in really awkward ways. So it ranges from questions like, how many hours can a driver drive in a week? And it'll give you 4 options. They're fairly basic, standard, multiple choice questions. But then you've got questions that will say which of these statements are true or false, and there'll be 4 statements that are all relatively similar, fairly plausible, and you've got to determine which ones are not, which ones are, and it'll give you, is it A, B, C? Is it 1, 2, 3? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4? Is it 2 and 3? Is it 3 and 4? And you go, oh my goodness. And they're the ones where, because of the way they phrase them and because the options available are similar, you've really got to understand and know what you're talking about. And so I can see how, even on the resit and with time to sort of study for the resit, there could well be a possibility that I haven't passed again. And I don't know. I sort of tried to do some mental maths on the day, and I think I did enough, answered enough questions with what I would consider to be relative confidence to pass. But then you factor in a fudge margin of, I don't know, 10% of that, or even as high as 12-15% of that you maybe got wrong, but when you thought they were right. And then you go, right, okay, I've got another X number of questions to have a go at and essentially have an educated guess at. And again, with the educated guess ones, you go, okay, well, let's estimate that I'll get 20% of those right or 25% of those right. So that, what does that do to my score? So my guess is that when I get my results back in what probably now about a month's time, I will have passed that part, but I don't know. And it could be that I have to go back and I have to resit it all again. And there were people there who were sitting their transport manager exam for the 5th or 6th time. Now, I have to say, if I was getting to that point, I would be questioning whether or not this was for me. I can sort of understand how the first one, well, I can understand how the first one I didn't get. Second one, I've really not got an awful lot of excuse other than the pressure of time to study from the sort of what's left in the day from work aspect. They're long days that I work at the moment, but that's on me. So it's kind of me to blame if I don't get it this time. I think if I do get it, I will be certainly looking forward to sort of taking on a bit more of that responsibility. I'm already doing some of that anyway, and looking at the sort of procedures and things that they've got in place, which is good for me. It also means that I know that when I'm in that position, I'm taking over something that is ready for me. What I'm also not, what you've got to be careful of is this sort of, I don't want to use the word arrogance because that's not the right word, but a confidence that just because you've been given a qualification, you can do a job. I don't think that's necessarily the case at all. And for those of you who've been in a number of roles and jobs in your life, you will know that that's not the case. You will know that there are people in positions who have a qualification but have no clue about the role and the job. And for that reason, I have signed myself up to various forums on social media linked to transport management, which it is useful for seeing how other people work and for building perhaps connections as well. And also it's an opportunity to continue learning with other people. So because, you know, effectively you're always learning. You're never going to be perfect. You're never going to get it right. And sometimes you have to ask the question. And I think that's really important as well to understand and appreciate about yourself. You should never walk into a role and go, I am it. I am the boss. I know what I'm doing. You've got to have a little bit of humility about things as well, and accept that there are people out there who have a lot more experience, and perhaps not in areas you think, but their experience is valuable nonetheless. And so you've got to listen to that. You've got to listen to people. So exciting times, a lot to learn, still a lot to learn. But if you are considering going down the transport management route, it is very, very accessible nowadays, especially with the internet. There's an awful lot of online content. There's physical content, as we've seen with the books. You can even go and sit in classrooms and study and ask those questions, those important questions that you want to answer. So do consider it, but again, you know, go into it with an open mind that you aren't necessarily going to be all singing, all dancing at the end of the course. Just like I was with the HGV driving, you pass the course, you pass the test, then you start your learning, then the real learning starts to happen. So there we go. That's kind of it in a nutshell for sort of heading towards the transport manager bit. But as you can see, there's a lot to think about, a lot to learn, and hopefully I'm making some headway into that. Anyway, take care for now, and I'll see you again soon for another video. Bye-bye.